Welcome everyone on behalf of the Truth and Reconciliation team. And, we have Revital with us. And so I think she'll introduce herself and get everyone started. But welcome and enjoy.
Thank you so much. So, welcome everyone. It is a real and very deep honor to be here. I found myself very excited at the opportunity to be giving this kind of topic, and I'll introduce myself. I saved Juliana the trouble of trying to pronounce my surname. My first name was hard enough. So my name is Revital Chitayat. I am a professional life changer. I work with reluctant messengers, people who have a calling, a yearning to impact the world, to change the world. And I help them to uh, reconnect to who they truly are in order for them to share their message and their mission with as much impact as possible. I work with a variety of tools, among which is voice dialogue, which is one of my favorite ways to explore and expand the potential of who we are. I am trained as a true purpose coach. I'm trained as a passion facilitator. I work with a variety of tools, with groups, with individuals, in order to help people impact the world in the best way possible. I have a mission to leave the world better than I found it. When my friend Iris told me about the truth and reconciliation concept, I just heard the words before I even knew what it was about. I said yes. Nilim, I see you're here. It's an honor to have you here. And it is an extraordinary concept. Um, and for me, a close one, because I lived in South Africa. I actually moved to South Africa uh, on the beginning of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee conference in South Africa. Um, my then boyfriend, now 30 years later husband, uh, is South African, and he moved back to South Africa in order to see what was possible. What was possible when a change like this could actually happen? And I remember sitting at the time. I was a part of the. I'm just going to put somebody on silent. Um, I'm just going to say that I'm muting everybody. I will leave time for questions at the end. I love questions. So if there are questions, you can either tap them in the chat, or we'll open it up later for questions. But for now, I put everyone on silent. So we lived in South Africa, and I had the privilege of working in the press, watching these incredible sessions into play, watching people, whether oppressors or victims, share their stories and see what is possible when people are invited to tell their story. When people tell their story with no judgment, with as much as possible, uh, uh, little shame, share it openly, share it in order to get the burden off, trusting that part of this witnessing is going to create a transformation. So for me, something in the wording is very, very powerful. And what I try to do is weave the concept of truth and reconciliation into what I talk about and teach, which is the connection between wound and purpose. I created the word that came up with for me was almost like a song line. I'm going to walk you through a terrain, and we're slowly going to make a journey through some of the concepts that I find extremely powerful, extremely transformative, and I've weaved them together in a way that creates a different story. I believe in reframing ideas, reframing concepts, reframing beliefs. And because I chose four potentially powerful, highly connotative ideas, I invite you to look with new eyes at each one of the concepts. So I'm going to start with a story of truth. The word truth, I have a little slide show. The word truth, when I looked it up in the dictionary, two of the meanings were a fact or belief that is accepted as true, or the body of real things, events, or facts. Now, we hold the word truth near and dear to our hearts. We explore, we try to find the truth. I know so many people who have dedicated their lives in the pursuit of what is true. What can I believe? The thing is that truth, the way we perceive it, and I've looked into it and I've researched it, real truth, universal, unequivocal, across the board, crossing cultures, peoples, times, a truth that holds that much is very far and few, are very far and few. It's a concept that we try to hold on to because it gives us a sense of security. If it's true, it's safe. But when I thought about this word truth, and in Hebrew, our language is constructed by roots. We can narrow down each word to a root. And surprisingly enough, the word truth, emet, shares its root with three very important words. One is belief, two is trust, and three is faith. So the same root works for all three. Truth is actually, in some interesting way, built of beliefs, faith, and requires an element of trust, which is very interesting because we'd like to believe the truth is based on facts. But facts are often in the eyes of the beholder. And so the truth that we believe in is simply a construct of things that we find safe, that we find a connection with, that we find meaning in. Now, this is relevant for everything because it allows us to start questioning, what do we believe to be true? What is truth? And it is especially important when it comes to thinking about ourselves. So if I know, if I begin to understand that the constructs, the truths that I see out in the outside world are mostly a combination of a belief that I have, of faith that I have in things, and of a trust that I have in things to be the way they are. I trust that the sun will shine up every day. I believe that, and again, according to our belief system, that people are good or bad in nature. I have faith in a higher guidance, in the universe, in something. But all of those are choices. All of those are choices that are connected to the culture that I come from, the society, my family structures, my ancestral structures. Now, if I begin to understand that what is outside is not necessarily true with a capital T, and if I believe, and it is a belief, that what is outside is a reflection of what is inside, that would infer that perhaps some of the truths that I've learned to believe about myself are also not necessarily true. Now, the core of the facts that we believe in, and this is very interesting, are what I like to call, and again, it's a very connotative word, our wounds, our core wounds. One of the ways, there's so many ways to explore wounds and to explain wounds. And I'm choosing one interpretation, which you can choose to believe or not. I'm not, it's open to interpretation, but it's something that after exploring it for over a decade, this is a definition that I work with and I find comfortable to explain. So a core wound is a moment in time when something happened that was so painful, so traumatic, and not necessarily, but often trauma is related, so confusing that something in me could not make meaning of what happened. Now, we are meaning-making machines. We like to understand the meaning of things. And when something happens of that magnitude, now it could be a moment in time, it could be a period, it could be something very major, and it could be a sentence. But for us as an individual, that moment created such pain and such confusion that we couldn't digest it, we couldn't give it instant meaning. And in order to attach a meaning to it, in order to understand why this happened, instead of looking outside, and core wounds are usually a part of our childhood, part of our initial years, the meaning that we give is not to our surroundings, it's not to our caregivers, but it's me. Something happened and it was me. It was because of me. And in that instant, we create a conclusion. Oh, that happened because I am something. Now, that something is the beginning of a wound. And because the cut is deep, what we do from that point on is, on the one hand, we try to avoid anything that would be significantly, remotely similar to that kind of experience. But at the same time, we begin to collect proof. We collect proof that this is so. We collect proof that the conclusion that I created, that meaning-making statement, is true. And it's true about me. So an example of this would be that a little girl is drawing, and the kindergarten teacher instructed to draw within the lines. But the little girl is very creative and she draws outside the lines, and the teacher comes up and says, "But that's not what I said. Why are you drawing outside the lines? This is wrong." And that pain, that feeling of making a mistake could be so drastic that the conclusion can be, I am wrong. Now, if I know that I am wrong or I am a mistake, I need one or two additional incidents to prove something that is going to guide me and going to determine the way I believe myself to be for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, a lifetime of years. I am a mistake. I am wrong. If a little boy is playing in the yard and is asked to share, and he doesn't want to share his toys, and he hears somebody saying, "Oh, he's so greedy. Look at him. He's so selfish." A conclusion can be, if I continue this behavior, the world is going to see me as selfish. I'm dangerous. And a wound can be around, I'm dangerous. Or on the other side, I'm unworthy. These statements, these tiny conclusions that happen sometimes in a split second, become a truth. And we guard these truths. We almost idolize these truths. We remain attached to these truths for most of our lives. So the word truth here shines its light on something that is our most contracted, most painful, most compressed version of who we truly are. But we feed into it. And that version of us is something that will determine how much we allow ourselves to be present in the world. It determines how much impact we have, how much we are allowed to express ourselves, what we do, what we don't do. When I looked at the extent that the wound impacts who we are, to me, if you look at the deep, deep resolutions, and it will be interesting for all of you to start exploring if you recognize a part of that wounded definition of who you are. But it impacts, to a certain level, almost every action we take. For example, right now we're sitting on Zoom. I'm checking because I'm in between papers. Some of us are with camera open, some of us are with camera closed. What determines whether your camera is on or off? Is it because you're busy doing things? Because doing one thing at a time, just sitting in front of Zoom, means that I should be doing more. I'm one of those multitaskers. It took me many years, and the work is not finished, to bring it down to 2 things at a time. So I'm quite happy to talk on the phone while doing dishes or washing the floor or folding laundry. Zoom was an incredible invention for me until I started realizing, yet again, that part of that is related to maybe a sense of, am I worthy? What is my worth if I do nothing? Perhaps it's related to the sense of, how do I look? Is this a good day? Do I have my makeup on? Do I look nice? What will they think? So even I have a glass of water here, and my mouth is a little dry. Do I drink the water now? What will they think about me? Is it okay if I take a drink of water? These little tiny instances of the thoughts that we have are not because we have absolute freedom to choose, but because a large extent of the choices we make are governed by the wounds, the conclusions that we believe in. So I'm going to take a sip of water. Now, the interesting thing is that most of this is completely unconscious. We are unaware, and the part that we are aware of we know to be true. So if I'm busy moving ahead with a huge project and I want to succeed, I want to touch as many people as possible, I want to have a great impact. But part of me knows, because it's part of my wounded identity, part of me knows without a doubt, truth, that I'm a failure, that I'm a disappointment, that I'm a burden, that I'm a mistake. Some of the energy that could be geared into doing what I'm meant to be doing is going to be toned down. That voice in my head is going to keep repeating, yeah, but are you sure? The doubt rises, the questions arise. All of that in order to keep us very safe within our wound-claimed territory, our familiar territory, what we like to call as our comfort zone. My definition of our comfort zone is that zone in which we're aware of what risks we take or don't take that are going to affect our wound. So anything beyond the comfort zone is something that might have an unknown impact on my wound. It means that there's something about the wound that traditionally we're used to having a desire to heal, transform, end, terminate, be rid of, overcome. But what if we could reframe the wound? What if we could turn the truth around on what that wound really is and begin to see the wound a little bit differently? Because there's something about beginning to understand that the wound drives and determines and is related to our greater calling, to our purpose. Now, I discovered this when I just started doing the work. I'd met Tim Kelly, who teaches, he created and teaches the True Purpose methodology. And he was speaking about purpose. And I kept thinking about the wound. And suddenly a story began to make sense in my mind. When I was 4, my parents, my mom is here, by the way. Thank you so much. My parents took my little sister and I to the States. My father was finishing his PhD in Philadelphia. And after quite a wild childhood in Jerusalem in a public kindergarten, I was moved to a private Jewish kindergarten in the States. And everything that I'd known before, all of my survival instincts, which were basically to grab what I wanted, to take what I needed, all of those, the moment I entered a scenario where I did not have the language, meaning they don't understand me, and I did not have the tools. So for the first couple of months, I tried to do what I was very familiar with doing, which is grab and take. And somewhere in the middle of the year, the headmistress of the school called my parents and said, listen, she's a lovely child, but if she continues behaving this way, I won't be able to keep her next year. Now, something in my consciousness became aware of the fact that if something doesn't change, I'm going to be rejected from the tribe. And something clicked. And from a certain point after that meeting, I transformed my behavior. I learned that to be nice, to be good, to be kind, to help others, to care for others was much more beneficial in my new cultural environment. It worked so well that at the end of the year, and I was looking earlier for the letter because my parents had kept it, but there's a letter from the same headmistress saying that in the 30 years that she's worked with children, she has never seen such a profound transformation. How lovely. Revital is such a good girl. She cares for everyone. She is such an asset to the kindergarten. She's always there to help. She's always there to support others. And thus, a new strategy system was born. Fast forward many years to my meeting with Tim Kelly, to my research into what my purpose is. And I discovered that part of the gift that I offer the world, and this is in very higher guidance-y language, is that my gift is that I heal the wings of those who want to fly. My whole life had geared me, had taught me how to heal wings. It was a survival strategy. It was a way to survive in the world, but it was also an inherent part of my gift, of what I offer the world, of what I've become masterful at doing because I had so many years to practice it, to hone it, to make it more accurate, to become the perfect wing healer. Wound and purpose interact with each other in a way that they become two sides of the same coin. Two sides to express something that starts in childhood, a wound. I am dangerous. I am unlovable. I am alone. a conclusion, an unequivocal truth, a knowing that if I do not change my strategies, I'm going to be left alone. And then something happens where we choose our strategies, we choose the things that we do, we choose the things that later we begin to call our personality. But that personality is basically a collection of strategies that we tested and tried over the years and chose the ones that best work for us. And we repeated them over and over again. And the minute that we become conscious enough, we begin to see in amongst the strategies, the gift of what my purpose is. The gift that I've been using, depending on what your preference is. Mine is playground because I'm not a very sporty person, but you can also choose a gym or a workout if that's your preference. That playground or workout to hone the exact things that are part of your purpose, part of your calling, part of the transformation that we create in the world. That movement and that realization that one is so directly linked with another was so meaningful for me because at the time, I was a young mother. And I remember when I was just beginning to understand the complexity and the price that we pay for believing and living out the truth of our wounds, I looked at my kids and I thought, okay, now that I understand this, I am going to do everything in my power to ensure that my children will not be wounded. I'm going to be so careful. I'm going to watch every word I say. I'm going to be so present that there's not a chance that I consciously will wound my children. And I remember for a few months, it was a mission. I researched, I read about it. I was so careful. I showed up with love. I did everything that I could to help my children avoid being wounded. Until I realized that this wound is taken out of its traditional definition, taken out of its traditional context, and reframed as something else, inevitable. The wound is something that defines us as human beings. It's almost like the thing that separates us from our divine nature. It's that particular flavor of who we are. Almost like that grain of sand in the oyster, the flesh that we create to surround it, that thing that keeps the grain of sand safe, that ensures that ultimately we can become a pearl, is uniquely who we are. And to begin to take it out of the context of something painful, tragic, something to be avoided, and to reframe it into something that is part of the definition of who I am, was life-changing for me, certainly for my children, because such a weight was taken off their shoulders. And it changed the quality of the work that I do. So instead of trying to change the wound, instead of trying to fix it, which was my natural tendency, I began to see it as a work of art. I began to see it as a masterpiece, and the strategies that we create, the unbelievable connections that we do, became ingenious. So instead of seeing the wounds as something that remains in the shadow, that we should hide, that we should treat with shame, that we should keep in the dark, for me to see it, to explore it, to be in awe of the creations that we create, allows it to see the light of day, allows it to just be, and allows for us to see what our true gift is. Now, when I can take that pearl out and say, so this is my calling, this is what I'm meant to do, it suddenly becomes a bit of a game. It suddenly becomes an interaction, a dance between my abilities, and remember that part of having a wound and becoming more and more conscious of what the exact definition is, of what my type of branding is, means that when I come in contact, and we usually magnetize people who sit not on the same experiences that we do, but on the same wording, on the same understanding of life, understanding of conclusions. There's something about being able to speak in a language that is so accurate. If I meet somebody, and I meet people who are familiar with the feeling of disappointment, I know to tell them, oh, so you're locked in that triad of anything that you begin, you're concerned, ultimately, that little voice in your head is thinking that in the end, this is going to end in disappointment. It's either going to be you who's disappointed from yourself, people who are going to disappoint you, or you're going to disappoint others. But it will end in disappointment. Now, people who are on that wound of disappointment immediately understand what I'm talking about. When I know that this is what drives me, when I become conscious of what it is that affects my presence and my expansion in the world, instead of using it as another tool of criticism and doubt, I can say, okay, so if my problem is that I'm concerned about disappointing or being disappointed, how do I share my calling bearing this in mind? How do I not let this affect me, but take the energy that usually seeps in that direction and use it to expanding my reach? If part of my wounding is that I am a burden, I'll be very careful about asking for help. I'll be very hesitant about partnerships. I'll be very reluctant to do things with others because I might be a burden. And might is not even relevant to the unconscious mind, because that truth is, I am a burden. But when I know this, when I know that this is part of my wound, when I know that this is part of the truth that I've come to believe in for so many years, suddenly I have a choice. Suddenly I can choose whether to believe it, whether to make that a part of my identity, or I can look and realize that that burden allowed me to become extremely versatile. That fear of being a burden allowed myself to be very sensitive about my connections with people. That fear of being a burden may have opened me up to being very resilient. But once I take it out of context and try to find within that burden that pearl, that perfection that relates to my calling, my purpose, suddenly the wound becomes a huge gift. When I work with people, I often reach the point with them, and I know that we cannot release anything until we reach that point, when I say, okay, so on the one hand, I can offer you the pain and suffering of knowing you're a failure, but with it, you get all the gifts of being very successful, of being versatile, of knowing many things so that you're never a failure, of being very clear, of knowing how to work properly. Or I can take your wounds, but with it, I'm taking all those gifts. What do you prefer? It's only at the point when people choose to keep their wound with the gifts that it offers that something is ready to be released. It's only when I stop running away from it, trying to overcome it, trying to change it or obliterate it, and I accept it, reclaim it for what it is, that I'm able to deeply understand and manifest my purpose. I can stop for a moment to see if there's questions. I have another wound around glasses, so I don't see them, but I can see the writing. Next time I'll tell you about my glass wound. So if there are any questions, you can write them in the chat. If there are questions, we're a small group, so you can also just take yourself out of mute and ask. And if there are not, then I shall continue.
Revital, just say that we're quite, maybe I'm speaking on behalf of everyone, but maybe just myself. I'm just riveted by how beautifully you have made the joined the dots. It's just beautiful. So if there are no questions, it's because I think we are just absorbing it with a profound sense of openness. So thank you for creating that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so thanks for saying that. Is it Nilima? I can echo that.
Yes.
I think what struck me again as you are teaching is part of our work is to welcome and give the wound a home, a healthy home, so that we can enter the transformation of the wound. I'm not sure if this is useful, but there's a piece that I want to play with and ask you a question. We had one of the sessions yesterday was a really beautiful meditation around intergenerational trauma. And I remembered in the meditation at one stage I was doing this and I was inquiring about what is this? And I came to the place where I had not come before to say my people were obliterated, so I'm protecting myself. So I guess maybe not a long story to say, but just I'm working with that to explain, so is there anything new to discover in realizing that kind of wound that I'm familiar with, but did not express in those words? So you are talking to that part of me. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And it's so what's the word? In Hebrew we have a third less words. In English there's such a variety. So let me find the exact word. I'll go with inspiring. I could do better, but there's something very inspired and inspiring to see the connection between inside and outside. So that wound of obliteration, to then take it inside and begin to explore what in me feels obliterated, where that obliteration wound touches me personally, and to see the gift, to see what lies in that, I was going to say opportunity, in that potential of obliteration, what strategies it created, what mechanisms were put in place on a very personal level, gives huge insight to what goes on the outside. So it's so useful. I come from a country where we constantly have this opportunity to see what's going on around us. There's huge diversity. We sit in a country that is still very attached to its wound identity. That's another element to the wound, and it's very interesting. And all of you, if you already have an idea of what part of this wound-based conclusion for yourselves is, it's very, very interesting to see that even when we know what it is, even when we're completely aware, it's not easy to give it up. We don't easily release it. I remember being in a class once and we offered people the option of realizing what their wound is and releasing it. And somebody said, no, but if I am not that, then who am I? So even though in our head, we believe that we want to be something else, that we want to get rid of this wound, it's interesting to notice that given the opportunity, we don't give it up so easily. If I have a wound around disappointment, and part of my belief is that I might be disappointed or I might disappoint others, what would happen if I would need to give that up? It would mean that I'd have to deeply trust myself, trust other people, trust the process, trust what comes in. That is a high price to pay. Wouldn't it be just easier to be disappointed or be ready to apologize for disappointing others? That's much more familiar. That's territory that I know what to do. That's the area where I have so many strategies how to work around. So it's an interesting little dance, recognizing the wound, realizing what it is, and realizing that I can either decide to keep that identity for myself, or if not, what would it entail to begin to expand, to not hold the wound as truth. What I want to show you is that when I was exploring this connection between wound and purpose, purpose or wound, what I realized is the majority of people, to start with, you know, after that beginning when we're born, almost pure essence, that grain of sand appears, that moment, that period, which becomes our wound, which defines a large part of who we are. We become identified with the wound. And when I'm identified with the wound, anything that is out of the scope of what is familiar, there's a sense that I can't do it, or I shouldn't do it, or I have to do it, or I'm driven to do it. But it's always in a reaction to my wound. Now, there are few people that I've met that are so purpose-driven that they will ride over the rocky terrain of wound. It doesn't last forever. Ultimately, the connection must be made. But I had an example of this a couple of days ago from a client of mine called, and she has a vision of changing the economic reality in Israel, especially dealing with people of a very low income level, which she's familiar with being a former social worker. And she decided that she's going to create a very extensive online course for them. And she started filming herself and hated the way she looks. Wound related. But her purpose is so fire driven. It is so important to her that she told me the other day that she shot 300 videos over and over again until she could bear to look at herself and sort of like what she saw, until she taught herself over and over again to feel comfortable in front of the camera. It took her a lot shorter than doing healing or transformation work, probably in a period of a couple of weeks, through just doing this over and over. You know, this is where the word brainwashing is so effective. Washing her brain with another image again and again, teaching herself to like what she saw in the name of her purpose. But usually, we start out being wound identified and wound driven. The second step, especially for people who are messengers, thought leaders, change agents, is when we discover our purpose, start living out our purpose, start living out our calling, start creating an impact in the world. But it's a wound-driven purpose. Now, a wound-driven purpose means that there's something about the way that I express, that I manifest my purpose, that is still wound attached. For example, and it could go on a variety of ways. And again, if this is relevant to you, it would be interesting to see if you feel like sharing. But if I know my purpose, but a part of me, like my story, I'm a good girl, and I am nice, and I care for others. Traditionally, my energy would go to other people. Now, if it goes to other people, it would also be connected to how they are, what they think of me, what they say about what I'm sharing. So my wound-driven tendency would be to allow a lot of my energy to be on them, what happens to them, and also to be very careful with my message, not to upset anybody, not to say anything too drastic, because I'm a good girl. Someone else whose wound is around, give me examples here. Let me go back to the chat because I'm on my share screen. Does anybody have a personal example that they want to share? Not necessary. Thank you, Anati. Okay, so I'll give you another example. Another example would be if my purpose is to change, once again, using her example, to change something about the financial environment, to change something about money in the world, to change a different approach. If my wound is around unworthiness, if something in me knows deep down that I'm unworthy, I might work too hard, bringing my mission out into the world because I need to be meaningful in the world. I might tone it down. I might feel uncomfortable. It is my calling, but I would be uncomfortable talking about money because what does that mean about me? To be able to fully own that change, to be able to fully manifest that mission, I need to be very, very clear about my worth. And if my wound-based definition is I am unworthy, it would create a huge clash. I might dim my light. I might narrow my presence, or tuck in my wings, as in my world. So that's the second stage. And as far as I have seen, it affects certainly everybody that I've come in contact with. It's a part of our journey. The third step, the most magnificent step, is understanding that the wound is purposeful. That the wound isn't something to be fixed. It's that thing which is our mark, which defines who we are, which began our journey once upon a time ago in order to discover our true gifts, in order to discover our true potential, in order to work through and overcome and expand so many of our capabilities. It's that point where we're able to share not only our purpose, but the wound part of it, to bring it to light, to, if I'm closing full circle, to be able to sit there in that Truth and Reconciliation Committee and shamelessly, without humiliation, without fear, without aggression or violence, simply share what my wound is, knowing that when I'm able to share it with the world, it touches other people, it inspires other people, it enables the opportunity to see what is possible when I don't spend so much energy keeping things in the shadow. And it allows me to be my full self. It allows me to share my mission with the greatest extent, with the greatest creativity, with the greatest impact.
Maybe I have an example.
Yes, please.
Now, I always thought that one of my wounds is being a stranger, because when I was a child, I was taken to another country, and I felt really strange and different, and had a really problem blending in. And this was uneasy for me all the time, being strange, being different. And now when I hear you, I found that I always understand the underdog. When I'm working, I always see the uh, different people and the strange people when I work with purpose, or when I work with organizations. So maybe this helped me do my purposeful wound work. I don't know if it's a good example, but that's what I was thinking.
It's a wonderful example because it's exactly that. It's the ability to naturally, easily see that wound, see yourself, and see your superpower, being able to recognize the sensitiveness in the environment, to see what is happening, to see, to work around the people who don't belong. And when we approach them from that place, without judgment, without criticism, without any desire to fix or change anything, when we understand that we attract people who sit on our same wound territory, there's a sense of such a home, that somebody sees me. Somebody really sees me, sees who I am, sees those things that usually I'm used to hiding in the shadow. So perfect example. What I wanted to...
I have a question, Revital.
Yes.
Do you have the experience of how the wounds can be complementary in people, and your wound will willy-nilly attract the complementary wound in another? And then what comes to... So talk about that, because that can be a big challenge.
A part of it, great question, because it's when you begin to recognize the potential, it becomes such a fun game to play. So for me, part of my, like Iris, I also spent a part of my childhood abroad, and part of my understanding is that I don't belong. I know that I don't belong, and I also know that they don't get me. They won't understand me. In order to be understood, I'm very wordy. If any of you, maybe in English, no, in English as well, but I will use unedited 3 different words to say one thing in order to make sure that 3 different people who might have, a slight variety will understand me. So I easily attract people who are used to not being understood. I easily attract people who know that they don't belong. At some point, I found in my clinic, 90% of my clients were people who had the experience of moving between countries or moving between continents, moving between languages, that feeling of not belonging, not feeling comfortable in a language. And because I know that experience, because I know what it feels like to not be understood, because I completely have embraced the outsider, I can speak it. So I can give examples, and they might be very personal to me, but I can say, and that feeling when you're looking in a room And that heaviness when you know you have to start making the steps and start doing the mingling and start introducing, but you know it's in vain because you're not going to belong to the group anyway. It's such a relief. Part of my mechanism is that in the 3 trust circles, my most noisy trust between not trusting myself, not trusting others, not trusting the universe. I traditionally, wound of disappointment, I'm familiar with not trusting others. So I attract people who, of these 3 circles, do not trust others. That sense of, I know that ultimately I'm going to be disappointed. I know they're not really going to be there for me like I need them to be. I speak to that. When somebody comes to me, I always start out by saying, I am so grateful that you ended up choosing me because I know, I assume, not know, but I assume that you probably have an issue trusting others. And the fact that you called me up and that you are agreeing to allow me to help you on this journey means a lot. Does that answer your question? So I spend time becoming so eloquent with these wounds because it gives me words. I wasn't sure. It was, see, look at my wound of did she understand me? So was that clear?
Absolutely. It's as if you were describing me, actually, up to a certain point.
Good.
It's striking. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. So when I'm able to stop seeing the broken pieces, to stop trying to sweep them under the rug or throw them away or fix them in a way that will be perfect, when I'm able to celebrate the wound, those places that I was gifted with a journey to see them, recognize them, embrace them, and turn them into part of my identity, but not my full, restricted, compressed identity. The opportunity to be my full self, it becomes a celebration, it becomes a work of art. It means that whenever I get stuck, whenever something in me is contracted, and we work in a spiral world, so it will forever go in and out and backwards and forwards, and we'll have so many opportunities to go back to the wound. But instead of going back to the wound and criticizing myself, here I am again. I knew it. I knew that I was going. It was always destined to be. This is who I am. Instead of that tendency to be able to say, oh, so I'm here again in order to explore more, in order to enable me to expand more, to go through the next step, the next breakthrough, the next opportunity, the greater version of me. When I'm able to understand that that is the opportunity, it becomes a game. Every recession back to wound just becomes an opportunity of expansion. And there, I'm tying it back in to reconciliation, because reconciliation is that place where former enemies agree to an amicable truce, or the process of making 2 opposite beliefs, ideas, situations, or in our case, purpose and wound, agree to agree. The idea of an amicable truce means that it's not one instead of another. It's not one on top of another. It's not one overcoming another. It's that place where we begin to dance in a very different dance. It's a place where I reconcile in order to be more of who I am, because within the reconciliation, lies what for me is maybe the thing that I'm most passionate about teaching. And that is the idea that we have choice. When we become conscious of all of these constructs, when we become conscious of the forces that drive us, whether they are wound or purpose-driven, the minute we are conscious of what it is, of what makes me pick up or not pick up my glass of water, what makes me show up or not show up in an event like this, I have choice. And when I have choice, I can lead my life in a manner that is most heart-centered, most expansive, most divine guided, because there I'm listening to something other than what is familiar, than my habits, than my childhood-driven strategies. So I leave you. I had a lovely quote, but I could not find the source. And funny enough, I didn't realize when I found it, but I'll read it to you in a second. So I love this one. Everyone wants to live on top of the mountain, but the happiness and growth occur while you're climbing it. Cliche as it is true, and we forget it to be true. And the other quote that I loved, but all I could find when I was looking for the source was an Indian proverb. So I apologize, but an Indian proverb says that before we can see properly, we must first shed our tears to clear the way. And when we're able to reframe our tears and realize that they're not good or bad, they're tears intended to clear our vision in order to move ahead, something shifts. So I am happy to stay here to answer questions if we have any. And it was an absolute pleasure. Before we say goodbye, we want to talk about, Jeannie, you want to step in? We have something to share about.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for remembering. So we are just on behalf of Truth and Reconciliation week, we are raising money for a few COVID causes. And if people would like to consider donating to any of them, I will put a link in the chat box. I'm getting it right now. And that also includes the agenda for the remainder of the week. So check that out. And thank you for attending.
Thank you. Are there any questions? You can just unmute yourself. You know what? If anybody needs to leave, then I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to share something that I feel very passionately about. Iris, thank you for telling me about this incredible opportunity. And Milima, bless you, bless you, bless you for an event that for me is a true manifestation of a magnificent purpose. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Revital. And your session is like the core of it, isn't it? You know, getting to the very core of humanity's problem, you know, the wound that drives us, how to find the purpose in that wound.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, at least.
Yes.
Thank you very much, first of all.
My pleasure.
It's been it's been magnificent, a journey for me. I really resonated in the major part. So I have one question, because I have made a triangle here on my papers. Some of our wounds, each one's wounds, could they be not ours? I mean, could they be a burden coming from ancestors?
Absolutely.
Because, yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, I don't know if you refer to yourself, that you always had the feeling that you don't belong and etc. I mean, my mom, when I started digging after some wounds and diseases because my triangle is, I mean, if it is like that, you know, I have the wounds and the diseases on the top corners, and then they go down to purpose. So I have made it like that. So she has told me that they had always the feeling since I was 3, 4, 5 years old that I was an alien. That I mean, that they couldn't really communicate with me. That I was somewhere, but no, I mean, you know, alone. And so whatever. So you answered my question that yes, it could be wounds that we carry, that they are recorded possibly in our DNA, and we bring them from other generations. And then the question is, could it be, despite, let's say, our effort to go through this transformation journey, could it be that, because the wounds could cause diseases?
Of course, of
And
course.
the disease, for me, and Nilima knows that, it's a double word from dis and ease, meaning something that pushes you out of your easiness.
Absolutely.
Like the dystopia. I mean, I'm also Greek, so I love etymology and
Me too.
origin. Are you Greek? No.
No, but I love.
Yeah. And so could it be that despite, let's say, our effort to find the purpose, or let's say to go closer to our wholeness, that, I mean, is there something to help us avoid the wounds become diseases and drive us to death, whatever death could mean? If, I mean, I don't know if I expressed myself correctly.
Completely.
Fully.
So you know, I'm separating the physical melody, which, you know, needs its own concern, and I treat it with great respect, and the connection between disease and wound, which is my territory. For me, a wound, you know, and it could be an emotional, a spiritual wound left festering will create a dis-ease. And when we don't address it, when it's just making its presence known, when we hide it, when we feed it with, you know, with even with ancestral energy, it will create a physical expression. And you know, I always say it, and then I knock on wood, because none of us want to get sick. And, you know, everything I teach is in order to avoid getting to the crisis. Because when we're there, we have much less freedom of choice. We do what we need to do. It's often, you know, in that place when we have nothing to lose, where we're willing to explore something new. But there's nothing like a good old-fashioned crisis, whether it's money or physical or relationship related, to make us stop and force us to explore our wounds. So there's something to be said for that dis-ease on any level that it appears, which beyond anything else is a call for attention. And it gets attention. When it's ancestral, how interesting to see how a wound is transmitted from one generation to the next, except that with you, it's gained consciousness. And when it's conscious, it ends. So it would stop with you because you're now aware of it, which means you wouldn't naturally transfer it to the next generation.
The psycho breaker that I heard yesterday.
Yes.
The term.
Yes.
Thank you very much for both.
Thank you.
And for everything.
Revital, I have a question, and thanks, is it Evgenia?
Evgenia, yeah. Jane.
So much. That was lovely. I don't know if I can formulate my question concisely, but I will try. It's in the area where we just left off, the opportunity of crisis, together with that beautiful quote that you read about tears. After my question, I would like you to read the quote again.
With pleasure.
And the third part is the opportunity to expand when we've regressed. So it's really great to hear you at the beginning. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and we've just had a crisis. We're in the midst of a crisis. And I feel like I have, like last week, my body was just really, I couldn't get out of bed the one day. And a lot of my work is about transformation and healing, racial healing. And I'm sitting with just a sense that when my work is to help us see our condition, and we are over 20 years past 1994, and there's such a struggle to really see a condition, to want to see. So what do we do and use a very good crisis? And when I'm facilitating, doing the work, but it feels a bit tiring.
Yes.
Because so few want to see. And we are paying such a big price for not seeing. So I wonder if you had some words about that, but also to read your quote again.
So I'll read you the quote first. It's a lovely quote, isn't it? And I couldn't find, everywhere I looked, it said, an Indian proverb says that before we can see properly, we must first shed our tears to clear the way. You know, in my country, it seems a lifetime now, but I think it was a month and a half ago, we had our own uprising. It was so devastating that I completely understand what you're saying, because you look around you and you think, okay, so I already know that there's something about the wound. And notice how the corona in so many different countries opened a door to exposing these deep, deep wounds, which otherwise are unseen. You know, we go through life and they're almost invisible until now. There was a place for them to be. There was a growing, bubbling aggression from you know, whatever was brought up. And when I looked around, I remember the first few days, I couldn't, all I could think of is, where do we begin? Where do we begin? How do we begin to do anything about this? And it took me a while to catch myself, because I was going to say over and over to myself, how do we fix this? So my age-old tendency to want to fix it clicked in, and I just looked at the anger and the hatred and the violence and the aggression, and every instinct in my body was to just make it go away, to fix it. Not realizing, not remembering that this is the way, this is part of it. It's that shadow part, but it's still the part of the same coin. And in order to truly be your purpose, there needs to be some form of expression, full expression, to recognize the wound, to see it for what it is, to see the identity, and begin to understand what the benefits are in that identity. We don't release a wound. We cannot release a wound until we have a better option. Okay. Until it's safer to believe in something else. I will not give up my wound of believing that I'm a failure. It's so safe to know that ultimately it might end in failure, until I understand that I have a better opportunity. That failure has given me the strategies in order to find a new way, a new path, something else. So there was that understanding that this is a part of the process. And this aggression and this violence and this hatred that's coming to the surface, it has to come out.
Mhm.
It's, it's the pus that needs to be released. And yet, I completely understand you. For us who work with the healing or the transformation, it's devastating. So, so there's both. What I can tell you about my country is that from it, in a manner that is just still incomprehensible, it birthed a government that is the most diverse, the most open, the most creative, the most professional that I could have dreamed for us if I had, if I could in those dark times. I hope I answered your question. And I send prayers. Yeah, I see what's happening, and it's devastating. Any more questions? And thank you.
May I say something?
Mm.
Talking about your countries, and not only, I mean, we have so many around this planet that they go through really very difficult periods, absolutely necessary, so we have the wound really opening. It's like the neuro muscle skeletic system of a person that needs to collapse, and then you start, you learn you build it, you rebuild it again from scratch. You learn how to walk again. And I'm saying that because mine collapsed back in 2018. So I had to learn how to walk. And yeah, so it's necessary to have that happening. And then you could see only light.
So I would like to believe that we were accustomed to that pattern of complete destruction, complete collapse, and then rebuild. I would like to believe that the more we evolve, we won't have to use that pattern being, as you say, the truth, the only way. I would like to believe that more and more options are slowly, as with this, this week, more and more ways are becoming conscious for us to see in order for us to have a choice. We never used to have a choice.
Is it a pattern though? Because with the black holes, you have something very similar.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
they drag you down.
Yep.
So I don't know if it is, let's say, I mean, I'm still studying, but it has to go to very high physics. I try to understand if there is anything there we could do to avoid it, or it is, it's how it is, and we have just to accept it.
I often use the metaphor of black holes to describe the wound, that anything that comes in its vicinity by force of attraction is sucked in, feeding the energy, and it's out of control. So, I could be walking and somebody doesn't even need to say something. If my sensitivity to my wound is aroused enough, it would be enough for somebody to suck air in or to raise an eyebrow, and it would immediately take me to my wound. That's how black holy we are. And yet, when I begin to map out the terrain, when I begin to see, okay, there's a black hole there, I'm familiar with it. Do I actually have to go there every time? If somebody was silent just now, does it mean that it must be sucked into the black hole? Do I choose? Or can I just breathe and let it be? So there's something about mapping out the terrain or again, you know, it's a hypothesis, but I'd like to believe that we discover new paths. The way of the black holes is zero choice. It's just, it is what it is. It gets close to the vicinity and sucked in. So it's a great metaphor. It's what I use to describe, you know, the potential of the wound to start with. I agree with you.
You need other galaxies with very strong bonds in between the sub-objects, and this way, when you are not a single unit, the black hole and no black hole could really absorb you and kill you. You need to be a mass with bigger forces.
See, we're already finding new ways.
Yep. That's why we are here.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure and a big honor. And I wish you all in Judaism, Tuesday is a day where God said twice, let it be good. So I wish you a double good day today, a double blessed day, and a wonderful rest of the week. And enjoy. There's so many incredible lectures and workshops here. May we all expand and enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye all.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.